Yeah, so the basic thing you want to think of when you're going into an interview is the who, what, where, when, why, and how. That will never fail you as you are getting ready to do your interview. So that's kind of how you come up with your base questions. Always have your interviewees start off with their full name, spelling, and title for you. That way that you know the pronunciation as well as the spelling and what their job title is. And then you start off with some of the more basic questions. And if an interviewee answers a question a little different than what you were looking for or doesn't give you enough content, don't be afraid to reword the question and ask that same question again. Typically, when you ask that question for the second time, you'll get kind of a feel of, or a different wording or a longer answer to that question. Yeah, so the biggest tip is definitely to not make them look at the camera. Not only does that look a little less natural when they're staring directly into the camera, but it also allows them to not really think about the camera being there. The perk of my job is it's all recorded and we're not live, so you can always tell them that you'll edit everything. You can re-ask questions if they stumble or if they want to start over with a question. Feel free to give them kind of that extra boost of confidence by being able to do things over again if needed. Always ask an interviewee at the end of the interview as well if there's anything you missed or anything else that they would like to add that gives them a little bit of a personal touch to the story, as well as maybe brings up topics that you didn't think of when you're doing that interview. Yeah, so phone calls, cold calls, emails are pretty much the way that I reach out to most of my interviewees. Some of them will reach out to me if they have a story idea as well, but typically you just tell them what you're doing, where you're working for, what style interview it's going to be, whether that's on Zoom or in person, or in my case on camera, so that they're prepared and they don't just show up and get a camera shoved in their face, because that's typically not how they want to start an interview. So just making sure that they fully understand what all that interview will entail. Sometimes I'll send questions ahead of time too if they're really just wondering kind of what the interview is going to be about. Send them like the base questions. I don't usually send all the questions because I don't want the answers to be memorized or practiced, but typically send 5 to 6 of those questions that I'm going to ask, and that will give them a better idea of what to expect. Yeah, so typically I'm different than some reporters in the aspect that I don't usually have a list of questions. I just kind of go in and see where the conversation takes me. For starting off as a reporter though, I'd recommend having 6 to 7 questions depending on how long your story would be, and maybe write those out ahead of time so that you're not coming up with them on the fly or forgetting those important questions too. So once you get more comfortable with it though, you typically have your standard format of how your questions are going to flow, so you can just kind of change that to whatever the story is. It also depends on how many people are in your story and how long that story is supposed to be as to how many questions you'll ask. Sometimes you'll get way too much information. Yeah, so definitely you want to know a little bit about your topic going into it. Try to do a quick Google search, see what that's about. If there's a press release, make sure you read through that. That'll pretty much give you kind of the basic information, and you kind of start with those basic questions, and then as you keep going you can ask more of the why is it important, really emphasize on the why aspect of a story, because you want your audience to be able to relate with the story and understand why you're covering that story. I think definitely just being comfortable with the questions ahead of time, making sure that you do your research beforehand, especially when you're starting off, is really important. As you get more into it, you don't always have to do all of that research going into it, but starting off, make sure you really understand at least a general overview of what your topic's going to be.